40 years of marriage is supposed to be a fortress. It is supposed to be a lifetime of shared rituals, inside jokes, predictable rhythms that become the heartbeat of a home. For Juliet, that fortress had always felt solid, until the cracks began to appear, hairline fractures in the stone walls she thought indestructible. It started small, as these things always do. A strange look in Julian's eyes when he returned from one of his countless business dinners. A faint perfume clinging to his jacket that wasn't hers, something too sweet, too young, too foreign to belong in their house. At first, Juliet told herself she was imagining things. After all, they were both in their 60s now. Age had made them softer, slower, and she thought maybe she was simply overanalyzing what were just ordinary signs of fatigue. But then came the email. She hadn't meant to look. She never snooped, not in 40 years of marriage. Julian had always said, "Juliet, all that tech stuff is too complicated. I'd rather just pick up the phone." And she had believed him. She believed him about everything. But that night, when she picked up his phone to move it off the couch, the screen lit up on its own. And there it was, a new email glowing in the darkness. The message was short, almost cruel in its simplicity. "You were incredible tonight, Dad Redheart." The words slammed into her chest like a physical blow. Dad. Not Julian, not honey, but Dad. Juliet's heart raced, her mind spiraling with questions she couldn't bear to finish. The red heart at the end felt like a dagger, playful and intimate, yet poisonous in its insinuation. She set the phone down with trembling hands, fighting the urge to scream. Julian was snoring in the bedroom, a sound that once lulled her to sleep, but now grated against her bones. It was a lullaby for fools, mocking her with every rise and fall of his chest. Trying to steady herself, she busied her hands with the mundane, clearing dishes, folding a blanket, anything to ground herself. That was when she found the second crack in her fortress. A receipt, crisp and new, tucked into the pocket of Julian's trousers. It was from a steakhouse in San Antonio dated that very night. Her stomach dropped. Julian had told her he was in Dallas for a meeting. He hated San Antonio, or so he always said, but the receipt showed a dinner for two, complete with a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, the same wine he had once bought her for their 10th anniversary. She remembered that night so vividly, the flickering candlelight, the way he toasted her success when she opened her first bakery. She had cherished that memory for decades. And now, with the slip of paper in her hand, it all felt like a lie. The same wine, the same ritual, but with someone else. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall, a wedding gift from her late mother. Each tick was a hammer strike, pounding out the rhythm of betrayal. And then came the moment that shattered any lingering denial. Juliet had just settled into bed beside her husband when she heard it, a faint murmur, the kind of half-formed words that slip from the mouth of someone drifting in dreams. She almost ignored it, chalking it up to nonsense. But then the name left his lips, clear as a whisper in the dark. Allison. Juliet froze. Her blood ran cold, her skin prickled as if she'd stepped naked into the snow. Allison. Her daughter-in-law. Daniel's wife. The girl Juliet had welcomed into the family, taught family recipes to, hugged on holidays. The name hung in the air like a curse, impossible to mishear, impossible to dismiss. She lay there rigid, her breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide open in the dark. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating, the walls closing in around her. She wanted to shake him awake, to demand an explanation, to scream until the roof caved in. But instead she turned onto her side, silent tears sliding down her face and into the pillow. For the first time in her life, Juliet was afraid of the man lying next to her. The next morning, the evidence continued to pile up. When she went into the garage to gather laundry, she caught a faint scent in Julian's SUV. Not just the smell of gasoline and leather, but that same floral perfume, clinging stubbornly to the upholstery. Her hand shook as she opened the glove compartment. Inside was a tube of personal lubricant, its cap sticky with dried residue. Her breath caught. She and Julian hadn't been intimate in years. He had always said he was tired, that age had dulled his desire. And yet here it was, damning, undeniable. She put it back exactly as she found it, but she could not put back the pieces of her trust. By the time she returned to the kitchen, her knees felt weak. She sank into a chair, staring at the grain of the wooden table, the same table where she had once rolled out dough with Daniel as a boy, where she and Julian had once planned their future. Now it felt like a stage for a cruel farce, every surface touched by deceit. Juliet pressed her hands together, as though in prayer, but no words came. Only the pounding of her heart and the echo of a single name. Allison. It reverberated in her skull, poisoning every memory, every smile, every scrap of faith she had left. And so the fortress crumbled. 40 years of marriage dissolved into shadows of suspicion, fragments of lies, and the cold certainty that her life was no longer hers. Suspicion is like a splinter, small, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Juliet had already collected fragments of truth, the email with its cruel red heart, the perfume-soaked napkin, the steakhouse receipt. Each clue was a shard of glass pressed against her skin. But what came next would cut deeper, tearing through even the faint hope she still clung to. It began with the photographs. Thomas, the private investigator Mrs. Miller had recommended, was a man of few words but steady hands. He didn't sugarcoat, didn't soften the blow. He slid the first image across the table at the cafe where they met, Julian in his light blue shirt, standing under the warm glow of a restaurant lamp, his hand gently placed on Allison's lower back. Her hair was down, her lips painted a bold crimson. She was smiling at him, her eyes locked on his like a lover. Juliet's throat closed. Her fingers shook as she picked up the glossy photo, as though holding it might burn her. There were others, Julian pouring her wine, their faces inches apart, Allison leaning in to whisper something that made him laugh. In that laugh, Juliet heard her own erasure. In 40 years of marriage, she had never seen Julian look at her that way. Not even when she was young, not even in their brightest days. "This is just the beginning," Thomas said gently, placing more photos on the table. "I'll keep following him." Juliet nodded, unable to speak. She took the pictures home and hid them in an old sewing box, locking it as if to lock away her heartbreak. But the universe wasn't done with her yet. One night, when Julian had fallen asleep in his chair with the television buzzing faintly in the background, Juliet felt a reckless pull. His old leather briefcase sat half open by the sofa, as though inviting her to look. She hesitated. 40 years of trust was a hard habit to break, but then she thought of Allison's perfume clinging to the car, of the whisper in his sleep. Her hand moved before her conscience could stop it. She opened the briefcase. Inside were the usual papers, invoices, bills, some hotel receipts she had already stopped trusting. But at the bottom, tucked beneath a stack of bank statements, was a thick envelope. She slid it out and unfolded the contents. Her breath caught. It was a contract. A legal draft. At first glance it looked routine, the kind of business paperwork she had signed dozens of times for the bakery. But as her eyes scanned the text, her stomach turned. The contract transferred majority ownership of the bakery chain, the bakery she had built with her own hands, the bakery that bore her name, into Julian's control. There, at the bottom, was her signature. Except it wasn't hers. The handwriting was close, disturbingly close, but Juliet knew her own loops and strokes better than anyone. She had signed her name a million times on checks, invoices, and love notes. This was not hers. It was a forgery, clumsy but bold, a counterfeit attempt to erase her from her own life's work. Her knees nearly gave out. She sat down hard on the edge of the sofa, the forged contract trembling in her hands. The betrayal was no longer just about love. It was about power, about theft, about stripping her of everything she had built from flour, sugar, and sweat. Juliet thought of the long nights in the bakery, rolling dough until her wrists ached, scraping flour off the counters while Julian slept. She thought of carrying trays of pastries into the cold morning, her breath fogging the glass as she delivered orders to hotels and restaurants. Julian had never once stood beside her at the counter. He had never lifted the sacks of flour or burned his hands on the oven racks. That bakery was hers, hers alone. and now he wanted to steal it. With Allison. Her hands shook so badly she almost tore the contract in half. But something inside her stopped her. Evidence. She needed evidence. Carefully, she took out her phone and snapped photo after photo, making sure every page was captured. The forged signature, the date, the notary's placeholder stamp. She slid the papers back exactly as she found them, aligning the edges, tucking the envelope into the same spot in the briefcase. Then she closed it, her face calm though her insides screamed. When Julian stirred awake and rubbed his eyes, muttering something about going to bed, Juliet forced a smile. Yes, go ahead. I'll be right there. He kissed her forehead absent-mindedly, as though she were a piece of furniture, and shuffled down the hall. Juliet sat frozen, her hand clutching her phone with its damning images. Her heart beat so violently she feared he would hear it through the walls. Upstairs, his snoring resumed, steady and oblivious. Juliet remained at the table, staring at the phone screen. The photos glowed back at her, the fake signature, the calculated deceit. It wasn't just infidelity anymore. It was annihilation. She whispered the words out loud, her voice trembling with rage, "He wants to erase me." In that moment, Juliet knew she was standing at the edge of something irreversible. The love story of 40 years was no longer a love story at all. It was a heist. A conspiracy. A betrayal so grotesque it reached into every corner of her existence. And beneath the crushing weight of despair, another feeling began to stir. A hard, cold determination. She would not be erased. Juliet had always believed she was a gentle woman. 40 years of marriage had taught her patience, endurance, the quiet strength of compromise. But when she stared at the forged contract glowing on her phone screen, something inside her cracked open. Love had ended. Now it was war. At first, she thought of confrontation. She imagined slamming the photos onto the table, the forged contract, the perfume-stained napkins. She imagined screaming until the walls shook, until Julian's smug mask shattered. But then she saw his face in her mind, the practiced calm, the dismissive shrug, the easy lies. He would deny, twist, gaslight, and she would be left broken again. No. A man like Julian couldn't be fought with words. He had chosen betrayal in secret. She would answer in silence. And so, Juliet began to plan. She started with the car. That cursed SUV, the vessel of his deceit, still reeked of perfume every time she opened the door. She remembered the lubricant tube in the glove compartment, sticky with residue. An ordinary wife might have thrown it away, confronted him, or wept into her pillow. But Juliet saw something else in that object, an opportunity. One night, when Julian fell asleep after too many glasses of wine, Juliet slipped the keys from the nightstand and padded into the garage. The house was silent except for the ticking clock and Julian's distant snores. She opened the glove box. The tube sat there like a monument to betrayal. Juliet picked it up, holding it between two fingers as though it were toxic. She carried it into the kitchen, set it carefully on the counter, and pulled open the drawer where she kept tools for the bakery. Among the spatulas and piping bags lay a tube of clear industrial superglue, the kind she had once used to fix a broken chair leg. Her hands didn't tremble. She worked with the precision of a baker measuring sugar. Unscrewing the cap, she emptied the lubricant down the sink, rinsed the container, then filled it with glue, drop by drop. When the tube was full, she wiped the nozzle clean, shook it gently, and pressed the cap back on. To the naked eye, nothing had changed. But Juliet knew the truth, she had just turned a symbol of betrayal into a weapon of justice. She returned it to the glove box exactly as it had been. She adjusted the seat, smoothed the floor mat, closed the door softly. Every detail mattered. If Julian suspected anything, the plan would fail. But the glue alone wasn't enough. Juliet wanted exposure, not just discomfort. She wanted Julian and Allison revealed, not only to her, but to everyone who had ever believed their lies. That's when she thought of smoke. The bakery had taught her 100 tricks about ovens, flames, and ventilation. She knew how quickly oil could smoke, how a small controlled fire could appear catastrophic to an untrained eye. The idea came to her in the stillness of the kitchen, the scent of flour and yeast mingling with the bitter edge of betrayal. She would lure them in, trap them, and then let the smoke do the rest. Juliet gathered supplies quietly, a skillet, cooking oil, a string, an old coffee can. She rigged the stove so she could ignite it from a distance, the way she might pull a tray of bread from the oven at just the right moment. A tug of the string would send a spark to the pan, igniting smoke thick enough to alarm the neighbors. She tested it once, watching black spirals curl out of the window, then quickly doused it. Perfect. She hid a small recorder in the bedroom, tucked behind a family photo frame. Its tiny red light blinked like a heartbeat, ready to capture every whispered word, every moan of betrayal. She connected it to her phone, so she could listen from afar. And then, as if fate wanted to gild her plan with irony, she wrote a note. A fake letter, slipped into the safe where Julian sometimes snooped. In her careful handwriting she wrote, "Julian, I trust you with everything. After 40 years, I have no reason to doubt you. Whatever happens, I know you will protect me." She smiled bitterly as she folded it. Let him find it. Let him believe she was blind, gullible, still devoted. The deeper his arrogance, the sweeter the fall. By now, Juliet was no longer the trembling wife who clutched receipts and wept into her hands. She moved with a strange calm, a cold clarity. She baked pastries for customers in the morning, smiled politely at Mrs. Peterson in the garden, and in the quiet hours of night, she became something else entirely. A strategist. A hunter. The final piece of her plan fell into place one evening as Julian announced he had another meeting out of town. Juliet nodded, her face serene. Of course, she said. I'll be traveling myself soon. A new contract in Nashville. I'll probably be home late. She saw the flicker in his eyes, the glint of relief, the curve of a smile he couldn't quite hide. He wanted her gone. He thought the stage was clear. Perfect. That night, as she lay beside him, Juliet listened to his even breathing, the mask of innocence painted across his face. She turned her head toward the ceiling, her eyes dry and open in the darkness. The plan was ready. She would leave him the car. She would leave him the house. She would leave him the illusion of safety. And then she would take everything else. The morning of her plan, Juliet moved with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every motion in her mind 100 times. She packed a small purse, slipped on her coat, and shook Julian gently awake. I have to leave early, she said softly, her voice calm, almost kind. A contract in Nashville. I'll probably be back late tonight. Julian rubbed his eyes, muttered something groggy, and kissed her forehead. All right, Juliet. Be careful. Be careful. The irony almost made her laugh. As soon as the front door closed, Juliet crossed the street to Mrs. Peterson's house. Her neighbor looked surprised to see her so early, purse in hand. Juliet, what are you doing up at this hour? Is something wrong? Juliet forced a tired smile. I just need a place to sit for a while. Can I stay here? I need to watch. Mrs. Peterson frowned, but her instincts told her not to press. She poured Juliet a cup of coffee and pulled back the curtain. From that window, Juliet had the perfect view of her own front door. At 10 o'clock sharp, a taxi pulled up. Juliet's chest tightened as she saw Allison step out, dressed in a light floral dress, sunglasses hiding her face. She looked like a woman arriving for a secret tryst, not a daughter-in-law coming to visit her family home. Julian opened the door quickly, glancing up and down the street like a guilty boy. He ushered her inside, and the door closed with a click. Juliet gripped her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles whitened. She slipped her headphones on, opened the app connected to the hidden recorder in the bedroom. At first there was laughter, the clinking of glasses, Allison's giggle, Julian's deep voice. Then, all right, we don't have to hide in hotels anymore, Julian said. Allison laughed, low and cruel. The old hag is gone, right? Juliet bit her lip until it bled. Hearing herself reduced to a joke, an old hag, was worse than any wound. Still, she forced herself to stay calm. Then the sounds shifted. The creak of bedsprings, hushed voices. Juliet closed her eyes, swallowed hard, and whispered, "Just a little longer." Minutes later, Allison's voice rang out, sharp with panic. "What the hell, Julian, what is this? We're stuck." "Shut up," Julian hissed. "Let me, just, damn it, don't scream." Juliet's hand hovered over her phone. One small tug on the string she had rigged, and the skillet of oil on the stove would ignite. She pulled. From across the street, she saw the first curl of black smoke rise from her kitchen window. Mrs. Peterson gasped, nearly dropping her teacup. "Juliet, your house, oh my God, it's on fire." Neighbors poured into their yards. Shouts rang out, "Call the fire department. Juliet's house is burning." Juliet pressed her lips together, her heart pounding with grim satisfaction. 10 minutes later, the distant wail of sirens split the air. A fire truck roared onto the street, red lights flashing, neighbors scattering. Juliet's breath caught when she saw her son Daniel leap down from the driver's seat, clad in his fire chief uniform, his face taut with urgency. "Team, get ready," he barked. "There may be people inside." Juliet's hand trembled against her chest. She hadn't prepared herself for this, her son leading the charge. She wanted to run, to stop him, to protect him from what he was about to see. But it was too late. The firefighters smashed down the door with a sledgehammer. Smoke billowed into the yard. Juliet could still hear everything through her headphones, Allison's shrill screams, Julian's furious growls. "Do something, Julian." "Shut up, I'm trying." Then Daniel's voice, shocked and disbelieving, what is this?" There was a stunned silence, broken by one firefighter's horrified whisper, "Oh my God." Another tried to stifle a laugh. Daniel snapped, "Silence. Everyone out, now." His voice cracked, not just from command but from heartbreak. But the damage was done. The firefighters carried Julian and Allison out on stretchers, covered hastily with sheets. Their bodies writhed, their faces twisted in agony. But no sheet could cover the truth. The neighbors saw everything. Whispers rippled through the crowd, growing louder, harsher, more venomous. "Father-in-law and daughter-in-law, together? What filth. Poor Juliet, 40 years, and this?" Mrs. Peterson, standing stiff beside Juliet, raised her phone, recording. Her eyes glistened with both pity and fury. She didn't need words, the whole neighborhood was already talking. Allison sobbed, her makeup smeared, her voice raw. "Please, help us, it burns, God, it burns." Julian cursed under his breath, trying to shield his face, but the jeers from the crowd cut deeper than any flame. Juliet stood in the shadows of Mrs. Peterson's living room, her heart a storm of rage and sorrow. She watched her son's shoulders slump as he turned away from the spectacle, his face pale, eyes hollow. Daniel had seen it all, the betrayal of his father, the treachery of his wife. His whole world collapsed in one blazing instant. Juliet pressed her hand to the windowpane, whispering, "I'm sorry, my son." But she didn't cry. Not yet. Because this wasn't the end. This was only the exposure. The true reckoning was still to come. Hospitals have a particular smell, bleach and despair, that clings to the air like invisible smoke. Juliet had walked those corridors before, years ago, when Daniel was born, when her mother had died, when Julian once had surgery on his shoulder. Back then, the sterile halls had meant life and family. Now they were the backdrop to humiliation, betrayal, and the unraveling of a 40-year marriage. A nurse with downcast eyes explained that Julian and Allison had been separated. "No permanent damage," she said softly, "only some skin irritation." Juliet nodded politely, though inside she wanted to laugh. No damage? The damage was beyond flesh. It was carved into their reputations, into her son's broken heart, into the very fabric of their family. She entered the room quietly. Allison lay in the bed nearest the window, her hair a tangled mess, her eyes swollen from tears. She wouldn't look up. Julian sat propped against pillows, his face pale, his voice hoarse. "Juliet." "I can explain," he stammered. Juliet didn't answer. She placed a thick folder on the bedside table. Photos spilled out, Julian with Allison in restaurants, on balconies, in hotel rooms. The forged contract, the screenshots of the email, the damning recordings. And, on top of it all, 2 crisp divorce papers. Her voice was calm, steady, like steel drawn from fire. 40 years end here. Sign them. And then disappear from my life, and from my son's. Allison broke down instantly, sobbing. "Daniel, please, forgive me, I made a mistake." She reached out desperately as Daniel entered the room, but he didn't look at her. His face was carved stone, his eyes empty. He walked past without a word, leaving Allison clutching at air. Julian's hand trembled as he reached for Juliet's. "Juliet, listen to me. I didn't want this." Juliet pulled back sharply. "Don't insult me with excuses. You wanted everything, my love, my bakery, my trust. Now you have nothing." He shouted her name, but the nurse entered, sternly reminding him that this was a hospital. Juliet turned, her steps firm, her back unbending. In the hallway, Daniel leaned against the wall, his head in his hands. Juliet touched his shoulder gently. He whispered, broken, "Why, Mom? Why her? Why Dad?" She had no answer, only an embrace. They stood together in silence, their grief merging into something stronger than words. Weeks passed. The scandal spread like wildfire. A video filmed by one of the firefighters leaked online, capturing Julian and Allison being carried out under sheets, the whispers of neighbors, the gasps of disbelief. Within days, the town was buzzing, and Juliet's name was on everyone's lips. Poor Juliet. She's stronger than all of us. She deserves better. Ironically, business at the bakery doubled. Customers flooded in, buying pastries not just for the taste, but to show support. "Your flan is still the best in town," Mrs. Peterson told her one afternoon, sliding a bag of sweets into her purse. "But your strength, that's what makes us proud." Juliet smiled faintly. They saw strength, but she knew it was built from broken pieces. Still, she accepted their words, because in them was a truth she had almost forgotten: she was not powerless. Daniel moved back into the house. He didn't speak much at first, but each morning he rose early to help in the bakery. He managed invoices, spoke to hotels, greeted customers with a polite nod. At night they ate simple meals together: rice, beans, chicken. Slowly, Juliet began to see flickers of light return to his eyes. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, Daniel asked quietly, "Mom, can you make flan this weekend? Like you used to when I was a kid?" Juliet's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Only if you help me stir the caramel." For the first time since the fire, Daniel smiled. It wasn't full, not yet, but it was real. Juliet also began to reclaim her own life. She joined a cooking club at the community center, where women her age swapped recipes and laughter. She started attending church again, sitting in the back pew where sunlight streamed through the stained glass, her prayers whispered not for Julian or Allison, but for Daniel and for herself, to find the strength to keep moving forward. And then came the day she opened her second bakery. She named it Phoenix Bakery. The sign gleamed above the door, painted in gold letters against a black background. A bird rising from flames spread its wings proudly, a symbol of rebirth. Neighbors gathered for the opening, clapping, cheering, lifting her up not as a victim but as a survivor. As Juliet stood behind the counter, arranging trays of pastries, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. The ovens hummed softly, the smell of vanilla and cinnamon filled the air, and Daniel, standing by her side, laughed with a customer. The fortress of her marriage was gone, reduced to ashes. But from those ashes, something new had risen. Not the illusion of love, not the false security of a man's promises, but a life built on truth, on resilience, on freedom. That evening, Juliet stepped onto the balcony of her new apartment above the bakery. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and rose. She wrapped her hands around a warm cup of coffee and breathed deeply. Julian's voice no longer haunted her. Allison's betrayal no longer crushed her. The whispers of neighbors had turned to respect. And her son, though scarred, was still with her. Juliet closed her eyes, whispering words to the wind, "True love cannot be bought. And freedom is never too expensive." For the first time in decades, she smiled, not the smile of a wife trying to hold a family together, but the smile of a woman who had finally saved herself. Juliet Richter, 65 years old, was free.